The Patriots finally land a receiver. What does that mean for Drake Maye's dynasty value? We'll tell you on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Kate is out today, but we've got Matt Williamson here. Follow him on X at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, at some point we knew that a receiver was going to take the money that New England was offering. They've been offering just boatloads of cash to all these receivers in free agency, and they've never been able to get one. Now they finally do with Stefon Diggs. Let's start with that part of it. How do you feel about Diggs in New England?
I like it. I'm just a huge May fan in general. Yeah, I mean, I think that he elevated a crappy group around him last year, and I think that's, check number one to being a star and a big-time fantasy producer. I have a feeling you know this better than I do. You're always a little bit more on top of like the current events. Do we think Diggs is ready for training camp, week one, et cetera? Where are you at on that?
Yeah, I actually saw a couple of the Twitter doctors talking about it. They saw some of the workouts he was doing, and they said, yeah, it looks like he's going to be ready for training camp, if not like the middle of training camp, but everything is trending towards him being ready for week one.
Like, I don't need him to play in the preseason, but I just want to make sure he's, in my fantasy lineup in week one, if need be. I mean, and I think that's big. So I didn't plan on really going down this road, but Peacock and I have talked about this, and, when he was visiting New England, and Brian's, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he thinks if Ayuk moves, it's to New England only, even with Diggs.
Yeah.
I also think, us fantasy owners, Dynasty in particular, we want Hunter to fall to 4 and go to New England because I think he would be a true receiver there who also plays corner as opposed to the other way around at other landing spots. And at a minimum, don't you think that the day 2, there is definitely a pass catcher or wide receiver specifically in the cards? Maybe one of the Illinois guys, or somebody reasonably early on day 2, even a tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Elijah Arroyo from Miami makes a lot of sense. Like, they're going to get some kind of weapon, and maybe, Matt, the best weapon would be like Travion Henderson, who they could pick at the top of the second round and give some more juice in the backfield. But it does feel like New England's not done adding weapons. I think this is a good step for them. Like, they get, I don't want to say one viable receiver, but kind of one viable receiver.
Right. I mean, that's exactly, you put words in my mouth. That's exactly what I was saying.
I like Pop Douglas, and they've got guys that I kind of like, but more as like wide receiver 3s, wide receiver 4s.
Do you have any hope for the 2 rookies from last year still? I mean, it's probably too early.
I was going to ask you, like,
but
is Jalen Polk a buy low? Kind of, we're going into year 2 of Drake Maye. Polk did nothing as a rookie. You can get him for a song right now.
I'd say I buy him real low, throw him in a deal type of guy. I mean, I think if you offer a 4th round pick for him, they're going to be like, eh. But if you have a trade in the making, I'm giving up one of my guys for 2 of yours, or other way around. Throw in Polk and we'll call it a deal, or whatever, something like that. I wouldn't mind him being on my roster because I did like him. I didn't love him, but I liked him coming out of school, and it is a new coordinator. And I do think I opened with what's around May and who the target competition is going to be, because it's so bad before this, and I do think there are many more shoes to drop. I think Ayuk's probably a long shot, but even if it's Membo at 4 is a start, I mean, at least give me something that's not terrible around this young player. But I think Diggs, because he can play outside, he can play inside, he's got to be the leader in the clubhouse, even if they do draft a receiver high, to be their receiving leader, don't you think? I mean,
doesn't it? it won't be surprising at all if like we're leaving September and it's like, oh, Stefon Diggs is leading the NFL in targets, right? He's averaging 11 targets a game because there's just not a lot else in this passing game. I just looked at Jalen Polk, wide receiver 101 on Dynasty League football right now.
Yeah, he's an afterthought. I wouldn't cut him if I didn't have to, and I'd take him as a throw-in, but I don't have a lot of faith in him or Baker after year one.
Yeah. All right. Here's the real thing. We think, Stefon Diggs is going to be 32 this year. He's probably got 1 year left of being like a fantasy dynasty asset. What I really want to talk about here is Drake Maye, because right now on Dynasty League football, Drake Maye is being drafted as QB 12. Does this move the needle at all for you for Drake Maye, or were you already kind of putting him in that slot because you were anticipating New England was going to make a move?
I would say more the latter. I mean, there's no way they were going in with what they had 2 days ago. You know what I mean? I mean, that would be criminal to throw that around May. I'm shocked they didn't do more going up to now, but you kind of knew something was coming and probably more will be coming. But again, I'm so high on this player. I think he doesn't need a great supporting cast to be highly fantasy or NFL relevant. He runs more than people realize. I think 12's kind of the floor for him. I mean, a year from now is what I'm really thinking with him, is he might be 5 a year from now. One more good off season.
It reminds me a lot of like Josh Allen in the early days.
Oh, yeah.
Right, where it's like he did not have a star receiver. This is pre-Stefon Diggs. It's funny that now Stefon Diggs Drake Maye, but like he was fantasy relevant even with a bad supporting cast because he was so talented, because he got the rushing ability. And then once he got and
he wasn't even that accurate back then.
No. Maye is so much more accurate at this stage than what Josh Allen was. But once he got that one guy that he actually could rely on in the passing game, that's when the numbers went to the moon, right? And again, Stefon Diggs is in a much different part of his career. But if they get Travis Hunter, or they get
Hunter,
or let's say they draft Luther Burden, who comes, they get him at the top of the second round, or they get a Emeka Egbuka, who I don't love, but I think it would be a massive upgrade over what they had.
Very welcome addition to that receiver room.
Yeah, and I think it's likely they can pull off something like that. I'm with you. I think QB 12 is the cheapest you're going to get Drake Maye for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and it's fair right now, but I would not sell him at that price. I would buy him at that price.
And I want to give you a couple quarterbacks that are being drafted ahead of him. QBs 8, 9, and 10. CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, Bo Nix. Would you?
I'm definitely taking him over Nix.
Okay.
I just think the ceiling's a lot higher, and that's not really a knock on Nix. I think he's going to be a better football player than Kyler, and maybe a better runner. And then over the next 5 years.
Well, maybe better for fantasy, right?
I mean, more productive runner.
Yeah.
And who was the other one? Stroud. I'd probably take Stroud right this minute, but I bet by this time next year, I disagree with myself.
Which team has the worst offensive line right now?
Pats.
Houston's is pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. They both have a lot of draft resources, at least.
Yeah, that's the difference. So we really like Drake Maye. We think he's a value right now at QB 12. And man, if they can go up and if they get like Travis Hunter, or maybe they trade back from 4, and because this is what I could see happening. I could see New England, let's say it's Abdul Carter on the board at 4, moving down 3 or 4 spots, and then taking someone like Tyler Warren. I think Mike Vrabel would love Tyler Warren. And that gets us really excited.
Now we're starting. Yeah,
exactly. So we think another move's coming. Buy Drake Maye now before the price goes up even more. All right,
we kind of just touched on it. I think we talked about this a week or two ago. I think Hunter might be Jamar Chase in terms of receiver prospect. And it's one of the only landing spots where I could see it maybe even coming to fruition.
So I watched all of his targets in the last 2 years on Monday, and
I think he's insanely good.
Yeah, and I've seen people compare him to like Garrett Wilson as a receiver, which is a great. I mean, that's
a great comparison. Sure,
I like Hunter more than Garrett Wilson.
I like him more than everyone I've ever seen. I think.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So, I think if New England were to draft someone like Travis Hunter, or draft Travis Hunter at 4. There's just no way that they're not going to put him at receiver, right? They've already got a really good cornerback in Christian.
Corners are good, right?
Yeah, their corners are good. They need playmakers. and maybe more than playmakers, they need stars, right? Like in New England, they need guys that like you could put on the front page of the brochure that you give out to the fans before the game.
Right.
Having Travis Hunter play offense would
With
be
Drake
pretty
Maye
dynamic.
for the next 10 years. Oh my gosh.
So
I might take him for, I might consider taking him over Genty.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about the quarterback carousel in New York and the most hilarious quarterback room in the NFL with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston in New York. What does that mean for Malik Nabers? We'll dive into it next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There is nothing like experiencing a big game in person, but getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. They make it so easy to find better value for tickets to your favorite sporting events, concerts, comedy, and theater events near you. I was just looking at the Gametime app this morning for some tickets that I was going to go to, or a game that I was going to go to this weekend. And there's some amazing deals on huge matchups. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Matt, let's talk about this Giants quarterback room. Which
before we do, can I go off script? Because I made a trade yesterday, and I just want to hear your opinion.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yes,
how they do?
to.
Okay, just been digging into these a little bit. I made a trade with a weird owner who is the most all-in I've ever seen in the Dynasty world. His earliest picks are 2028s. I mean, he has nothing. I mean, if you get a pick from him, it has to be from 2028. But he asked about Kamara, who I really wanted to get rid of.
Okay.
And I got rid of Kamara and Kyler, who we just mentioned, for Patrick Mahomes, who I don't own in any Dynasty league, and I kind of let my fandom just kind of excite me. Yeah, I want to own Pat Mahomes. That sounds fun. And you shouldn't think that way. Rico Dowdle, who I know is not worth much, but I'm think I'm going to deal him to the Chuba owner. And a 2028 second-round pick.
I love it. So,
okay.
So here's part of the reason. Well, I just get the sense that we're going to have a vintage Patrick Mahomes season coming up.
I do too. I really wanted him more than Kyler.
Yeah, and there's part of me that thinks he hasn't had one of those big fantasy seasons in a while now. The defense is getting a little bit older. And I think they're just going to ask him to do more in the passing game. Xavier Worthy going into year 2. Hollywood Brown back for a second year. Rashee Rice will be back at some point, whether that's in October or November.
Kelsey's still floating around, you know?
Yeah. And I wouldn't even be surprised if they drafted another passing game weapon in the first 2 rounds, right? Like,
yep.
I just get the sense
Arroyo or someone like that.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm going to mention another guy. I think Luther Burden from Missouri wouldn't be shocked if he's somebody that we consider as well, because they value those guys that can make plays after the catch so much. I'm buying low on Patrick Mahomes right now, and I know that sounds weird, but Patrick Mahomes is being valued as QB6. I like him more than that.
Sign me up. Yeah, I think he'll probably be their starter for a while too.
I think that's.
I think his job's pretty safe. You know.
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe, and he's just way more durable than what Kyler Murray is, and I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well. So good trade by you. It's almost like you've played Dynasty for.
Well, he offered me the 2 players straight up. I'm like, throw in that 2028 second, and we got a deal, and I'll forget about it for 3 years.
I will say those are my favorite type of trades, where you just get like these random picks multiple years down the line. By the time the draft comes, you don't even remember how you got it, which is always a little bonus, right?
I assume he'll be the worst team in the league by then, because everyone he has is Kamara's age.
Yeah, there you go. So you're talking about maybe a top 15 pick that you got for a throw-in.
Hopefully. Right? All right, sorry, the real.
Yeah, no, you're good. I'm glad you told me. Winston. Obviously, none of these quarterbacks are long-term options in New York. It doesn't rule them out from drafting a quarterback at 3. But what does this do for you for Malik Nabers?
Doesn't move the needle a lot. Actually, I would say it helps him more than I would have said a week ago. I definitely think Dart or Sanders could end up in New York. I mean, I don't think Sanders gets past 3, although I would not take him at second or third. But I just think those two ownership groups in Cleveland and New York are saying you better get your rookie quarterback. And I could see the Giants ending up with Hunter or Carter or whatever, and then trading back to 20 and taking Dart, which I also wouldn't do, but who cares? I just love Winston for my receivers. I mean, I think he's better than Wilson. I don't know if they'll agree. Nabers isn't exactly the Metcalf, Pickens, downfield, outside the numbers dude, but he's not bad at it. He's not bad at anything. I want Winston to win the job.
Here's my fear, and it has nothing to do with Wilson and Winston because those are guys, those are short-term, 1-year options at quarterback. And I actually think we saw Wilson do enough last year to like get George Pickens involved, make plays down the field. They didn't play a ton of games together, but when they did, Pickens was productive. We know what Winston does.
He'll take shots.
Yeah, and we know what Winston does for a quarterback. So that doesn't worry me. What worries me, Matt, is that I feel like they might pass on a quarterback at 3.
Okay.
Right? And draft Travis Hunter because he just might be the best player available. Let's say it's Abdul Carter to the Browns at 2, Travis Hunter to the Giants at 3. And now you're adding Travis Hunter to Malik Nabers, to Darius Slayton, to Wan'Dale Robinson. Yeah. And Malik Nabers right now on Dynasty League football is the 3rd overall player. I would assume that Travis Hunter is going to eat into that workload.
Yeah, that could happen. And that'd be a terrible spot for Hunter. All the good stuff we just said about him in New England would get washed away, and they wouldn't have a long-term quarterback in that scenario unless they somehow got back in on Sanders or Dart. Neither guy I love. Are you suggesting to move on from Nabers now?
No, I don't think so, because I mean, what are you going to get?
Too good.
Yeah,
right.
You're not going to trade him for Puka Nacua in a 2nd-round pick or anything like that, right? I just think this next month could be kind of scary for his dynasty value a little bit, right? Because if they draft like Shador, it's fine. Like we're not moving him at all. If they draft Abdul Carter, we're not moving him at all. Travis Hunter makes this thing where maybe he goes from wide receiver 3 down to wide receiver. If they draft Travis Hunter, would you rather have Malik Nabers or Brian Thomas?
Probably Thomas.
Yeah, that's kind of the point here, right?
Yeah, and I'm assuming Hunter wouldn't even be a full-time receiver. In the real world, I might rather have them than Chase and Higgins.
Yeah,
in the real world.
I mean, yeah, I would agree. That's a better duo in my opinion. Yeah, I would agree. It's just a little bit scary for Malik Nabers. I don't think you can move on now. I think you just wait it out. But you just have to realize like that's a legit possibility now.
I don't know if he'll be there long term, but I think Dayball will feed Nabers no matter what. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that his targets are going to go down. And his quarterback play is probably better than last year.
Could it be worse? I mean, they were playing Tommy DeVito and Drew Lock.
It's going to be better than that.
Daniel Jones. That's what I said. I don't love
the Hunter thing is scary.
Yeah, I don't love Russell or Winston, but I think if you have Nabers, you love those guys compared to what he was playing with last year.
I mean, he's a lot better than Judy, who was lighting it up with Winston.
Yeah, Judy finished as what? I think 6 in receiving yards this year.
I think so. He's a Pro Bowler. I mean, Nabers is a way better football player.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about some trades. I want to know if now is the time to trade away your 2025 first-round picks before we get to the NFL draft. And, of course, before we get to your rookie drafts, we will do that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Ben, I wanted to talk to you about like a big picture thing here because I wanted to ask you, when are first-round picks in Dynasty the most valuable? Is it the day after the NFL draft when everybody's excited about these players? Is it as the draft is going on? Or is it right now, like a month before the draft, everybody's excited about all these players? Because I know for me personally, once you get into the draft and you're on the clock at like, let's say pick 8, that pick is just way less valuable than it was for me a month ago because you just never know who's going to be on the board. You always think that it's going to be the best case scenario for you.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts here?
I think it's probably safe to say that they probably peak before the draft as a rule of thumb. But I have a feeling last year, if I would have moved my 108, whatever, for the going rate, I would have lost that trade. You know, if I traded away from McConkey or Thomas or, you know, I mean, that class was a heck of a lot better than this class. And Dynasty is such a big picture thing. I don't usually look at my team needs. But if I'm running back hurting this year, I don't know that I'm moving picks all that much. I might take 3 or 4 in the top, you know, with like all my rookie picks, you know, but go running back crazy this year. Part of it's because I don't really like the receivers.
Well, and that's my point. Like Kate and I have been doing these.
Weird, right?
Yeah, we've been doing these profiles for Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, Mecca Bouquet. We like these receivers, but every time that we get to like talking about landing spots and where they're expected to be drafted, like we were looking at a Mecca Bouquet on Tuesday, and it's like, okay, Houston would be a good fit as the number 2 with Nico Collins, or Buffalo, or New England. And those are all like good real life spots.
Right. The team.
But they don't get you all that excited from a dynasty perspective.
No. I mean, you kind of mentioned it before. I think what gets you excited is the Titans, the early round 2 teams, maybe the Raiders, you know, and a lot of these mocks you see anymore only have 2 receivers going in the first round. I don't think that's crazy.
No. And if we're talking about like a Mecca Bouquet going to the Raiders, like in round 2, you're still talking about Geno as the quarterback and Bowers being the number 1 option and them running the ball a lot. So even that's a preferred landing spot for Ibuka, but that's not moving up his value. That's kind of that's one of the higher end spots for him, where it's probably
you mentioned New England before would be nice, but
it's probably more likely he's going to lose value. So I'm wondering if now is the time to trade your first round picks for players. Now, you're not going to trade it for a veteran running back because it's just not a wise strategy. But if you can flip your first round pick for, let's use Garrett Wilson, somebody that you and I both like. We've got multiple of those trades over the last couple of days. I think I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I guess that's a good example. London, some of those type of dudes, maybe even lesser play. You how about like a Waddle in the next year's second, you know, something like that. You know, I wouldn't mind grabbing a future pick in a deal if I'm moving my first rounder this year, because maybe the draft does go, the first 7 picks are pretty favorable and you want to get back in, you know what I mean? And I have future picks to do it. I mean, I wouldn't mind grabbing a next year's second and a player for my mid to late first. Where are you at on 1-3? Like, I'm taking Hampton at 1-2 no matter what. If I have 1-3, I'm shopping it. If I have 1-4, I'm shopping it. I think it depends where you're at.
If you're in a super flex league, this is going to be Campbell no matter what. Right? But if you're in a non-super flex league, you're probably looking at like Travion Henderson, maybe Quinshon Judkins. Right now, it's Tet McMillan. And that's kind of the guy I wanted to ask you about, because Tet McMillan, who's going like somewhere in that 1-3 to 1-5 range, he's being valued over receivers like Rome Odunze, Devontae Smith, Xavier Worthy, T. Higgins.
I want all those guys over every incoming rookie.
And that's kind of my point. So if you can trade that, if you can trade pick 105 or 106 for T. Higgins or Garrett Wilson, I think I'm just doing that in a heartbeat without even thinking about it.
Yeah. I think I know you well enough now too that, boy, if I can turn one of those picks into a Dunze and maybe a little sprinkling on top, like, okay, you know, a disgruntled Dunze owner.
I mean, Rome is being drafted as wide receiver 19 in startup drafts. So, like, if I can flip a first round pick for him, I would do that in a heartbeat. And you probably could, because this is just a phenomenon that happens in dynasty leagues. People love incoming rookies because there's always the hope that the next rookie that you draft is going to be Jamar Chase or Malik Nabers or Jahmyr Gibbs, when we know it more often than not that it doesn't happen that way, that most of these rookies are going to disappoint or fall below their value.
Like McMillan to me is Michael Pittman. He's not Mike Evans or Drake London that people were.
I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Drake London. And even Drake London's being drafted outside the top 10 receivers now, right? Yeah. So I agree with you. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Matt on X at Williamson NFL. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. Kate will be back tomorrow, and we'll see you right here on Thursday.